So we're going to get into today's message, which, if you can see the screen from where you're at, it's the big mighty 40-incher. Much smaller than our regular one upstairs. The title is, What Do You Have in Mind?
Okay.
And the subtitle is, The Things of God and the Things of Men. According to the Cleveland Clinic, an average person processes about 50 thoughts every minute.
Okay.
We're constantly processing thoughts, noticing colors, odors, smells, considering why did he choose to comb his hair like that? Other little things. When you total that up, it's about 70,000 thoughts in a 24-hour period. You're going to have 70,000 thoughts today. We have a lot on our minds. That's the point. So here's a question for participation to get us going. What are some of the things that we find ourselves thinking about? What are some of these 70,000 thoughts that we have in a day? Gina?
Preparing a meal for 30 people on Thanksgiving.
Okay. That's a thought. Sounds like a real life thought.
Yeah. As an example.
What am I going to eat after church? Yeah. Where are my car keys? Ivy?
Scheduling and priorities.
Okay, what are my priorities? Yep, Melissa.
What are my kids doing?
Well,
What are my kids doing?
Yeah, that's enough. That's enough to keep Melissa busy. She's got 5 Okay, anybody else? What are some of the things we think about? Ivy again.
Finances, money.
If someone wasn't going to say it, I was going to say it. We
Okay.
think about that money.
I beat you
Yep,
to it.
that's true.
What day is it? Because I was planning on going to work today, and I realized, no, it's Sunday.
Nikki,
How much colder is it gonna get?
Yes.
right? It's only November.
Where am I gonna find another?
Micah,
How many office chairs can you stack?
how many what?
Office chairs can you stack?
How many office chairs can you stack? Yeah, that's it. Those are the things we think about. Era?
Exercise routine moves. I always have some of those running through my mind.
Yeah, because you work at the Y there, right? Teacher classes, so she's thinking through exercises. Rebecca?
I think it's the eternal question. What is for dinner tonight?
What in the world are we going to eat?
What do I
Right?
want to eat?
You know, a lot of our thoughts have consequence. Like it matters what we're going to eat or where our kids are or what's going on with our finances. Might not matter as much how many office chairs can I stack, but it doesn't stop us from thinking about
No,
it.
definitely not.
The New York Times reported in an article that our minds wander from their intended task 47% of the time on average.
Oh boy.
Now, if you have a bit of ADHD, you can probably double that. But in other words, in half the tasks that we take on, we end up off task,
Yeah.
Sure.
at least for a while. You throw in mobile devices and notifications, which provide a nearly endless amount of distraction possibilities, and even sacred places like the family dinner table are full of distractions. Even a simple trip to the restroom can take 24 minutes because you just kind of got sidetracked in there on Facebook or YouTube or whatever it was, and next thing you know, I got someplace to be. I got to get out of this bed. Even the worship service is open for distraction. We never meet down here. We've been meeting in this building for a year, and it's built in 1852.
Love it. Love it.
It's got, you know, things that are kind of added on retroactively, like the heating system, and sometimes it goes out,
Right.
like it did today. So you have heat in some parts, but not in others. But this is our first time meeting down here, so some of you are going to wonder, what is that noise?
Right.
Why did they hang these sheer curtains all around? Is it too hot down here? Maybe we should have met upstairs in the cold. Does that piano actually work? Is anyone going to play it? Why does Chad like the Michigan Wolverines? He's not from Michigan.
He's not. Yeah, that is the question.
These are the kind of things that you're going to be tempted to think about when you should instead be listening to the message.
All right, we're with you, David Clark.
So when I asked, what do you have in mind? The answer will not only vary, it will change frequently. And that might sound just fine and fairly harmless. But I'm going to tell you something. It can be fatal to the heart and the soul. It matters what we have in mind. Our main text this morning is going to be coming from the Gospel of Matthew in the 16th chapter.
All right, come on.
Okay, here we go. Matthew 16, and we're going to start here in verse 21. A little bit of a backdrop. Jesus has just had a little meeting with some of his closest disciples, or people that some of you may know as apostles, amongst them the Apostle Peter. And just a few verses earlier, Peter proudly proclaims, boldly proclaims, Jesus, you are the Messiah, you are the Christ, you are the chosen one. And Jesus is very proud of of Peter for reaching that conclusion. And he goes, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, good for you. You get it. And on that truth, that Jesus is the Messiah, I'm going to build the church. And even the gates of hell itself will not be able to ultimately overcome it. And just 5 or 6 verses later, this Peter that Jesus is so fired up about, so proud of in this moment, is going to take a turn. And we'll read it here. So in verse 21 of Matthew 16, it says, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be, killed, and on the third day raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Rebuke is like a really strong correction. And Peter says, never, Lord. This shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. The word Satan can be translated or understood as adversary, or one who is against me. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Jesus had become quite renowned at this point. The crowds that were traveling with him had grown to a greater size. They had witnessed some amazing things and heard some very unconventional teachings by this point, like loving your enemy, right? Praying for those who persecute you. And people in significant roles of leadership in both the religious as well as in the secular or not religious circles were beginning to take notice of Jesus, and not all of the reviews were positive. They weren't all 5-star reviews. Some of the religious leaders and authorities were down on this idea of Jesus because he was presenting something of a new kingdom and a new way of worship that was going to establish the old order that they were so used to and frankly had profited a fair amount from. And so some of them began to demand answers from Jesus, or at least signs from Jesus that would prove that he had the authority to teach as he did and to expect this kind of devotion that he was demanding. And Peter had witnessed these great things from Jesus. And like I mentioned, he had just pronounced that he believed Jesus was the Christ. But then here we are moments later. And what's Peter doing now? He's rebuking Jesus. He's telling Jesus, no, what you're saying is wrong. I know you're the Messiah. I know you're the chosen one, but you're not right. Now see, those two things can't go together. Either Jesus is the Messiah, the chosen one who's been sent from God and should know what he's talking about, or he's wrong and therefore not to be trusted as the Messiah. What happened to Peter in these 6 verses? He gets distracted. He loses sight of the things of God and gets his mind set on the things of men. He rebukes Jesus for this unthinkable notion that Jesus, it says here we read, would have to suffer in verse 21 and be killed. That's what Peter's objecting to. And then we see here Jesus' response.
Go on, Dan.
And it's pretty abrupt, right? He looks at Peter and says, "You're a stumbling block to me. You're in my way. You're trying to trip me. You're an obstacle." How did Peter become an obstacle? By trading in the things of God for the things of men. Just mentally. Just up here. Peter was still wearing the same outfit, was still standing in the same place probably that he was when he called Jesus the Christ, the chosen one, 5 or 6 verses earlier. Nothing had changed about what Peter was doing, but everything had changed about what Peter was thinking. You know, to have in mind the things of God versus the things of men is not an easy thing to do. The things of God are eternal in their importance. They're focused on God's glory, not necessarily on ours. On His satisfaction, not necessarily on ours. Why is it hard to think of things that satisfy God rather than satisfy ourselves? Well, because we're us. We're our own advocates. Right? Whatever satisfied God isn't going to feed me lunch today. Whatever satisfies God isn't going to answer the question of how many office chairs can I stack on top of each other. Or when is Keith going to trim that beard? Right? Question answered.
We can move on.
So we get distracted because we're thinking from within our own skin, and that's totally normal and intentional, and it's okay. But it means that we have to be intentional to get outside of ourselves. We won't naturally, just whimsically without thinking about it, transfer on over to thinking about the things of God rather than the things of men. We'll have to do it on purpose. The things of God are set on things like the soul. The things of man are centered on things like the flesh. What do I think? What do I feel? What do I taste? What do I smell? What do I sense? They're focused on the now. Oftentimes, they're focused on safety and security. Especially when there's so much opportunity for safety and security around us. We live in a very different time than they did. We're not in an agrarian society where we're all farmers, at least on some level. Right? We're not making our own candles or pressing our own wine. Right? We've got the ability to have electricity and heat and running water just coming right into the house. That frees us up to think about so many other things.
Right. That's right.
And nobody, not the person to your left or your right or in front of you or behind you, no one is immune to the lure of lesser things. It's a totally normal condition. We're going to go to Matthew chapter 4.
Okay.
And just to demonstrate this, we're going to take a look at Jesus. He's the Lord, He's the Messiah, He's the chosen one. But check out this scene from Matthew chapter 4. In verse 1 it says, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. Who was tempted? Jesus was tempted. If Jesus gets tempted, what chance do we have of not feeling tempted from time to time? In verse 2 it says, after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. Understatement. The tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Jesus answered, it is written, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of God, he said, throw yourself down, for it's written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jesus answered, it's also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and said, all this I'll give to you if you bow down and worship me. Jesus said, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And each of these lures and each of these traps that was set by the tempter, where was Jesus' mind?
Centered on Jesus.
Centered on God, on the things of God rather than the things of men. He constantly comes back to the lure of lesser things, pretty valuable things. You want to be king of all the kingdoms? You want to have all the treasures of the world? I'll give it to you. That's a pretty tempting offer. Jesus says, no, you serve God only. Throw yourself down. The angels will catch you. No, I'm not supposed to be putting God to the test. See, he's thinking about what God thinks in each of these temptations. Man doesn't live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. If Jesus isn't immune to this temptation, friends, we're not going to be either. But we can take a lot out of how he responded to the temptations. He responded by having in mind the things of God rather than the things of men. See, all these opportunities can also be stumbling blocks. We'll go back to Matthew chapter 16. Great things can also be stumbling blocks. Jesus identifies Peter in Matthew 16, not as his defender. Oh, it's sweet that you don't want me to die.
Right.
Thanks a lot for pulling me aside and telling me, no. You being killed cannot be the way, not going to let it happen. Jesus didn't say, that's so kind of you, Peter. Instead, he looked at Peter and said, you're a stumbling block to me. Not a defender or a loyal friend with a good heart, but a stumbling block, an adversary. You know, I don't think we ask ourselves often enough whether an opportunity is or is not a stumbling block. Particularly if the opportunity seems to favor our flesh, our money, our security, our comfort. If it's got a ton of what appear to be benefits to us, I think we just assume, like a fish seeing a worm just magically dangling off of a hook in the middle of the lake. How did that get here? They don't even ask. They just go, I'm hungry, there's a worm. Let me hit it. Next thing you know, he's got a hook in his mouth. I don't think we ask ourselves often enough whether opportunities that sit in front of us are indeed a good opportunity or whether they are a stumbling block. If it feels good, we tend to chase it. But that's exactly how mice get caught in traps. That's how fish end up on hooks. That's how deer. We got several of the guys out this morning hunting, right? That's how a lot of deer get shot. You know, Mike Gibbs, pretty good hunter, pretty good fisherman as well. But Mike's got tricks that he uses, right? And it usually has to do with bait. He'll go somewhere before he hunts the land and figure out where's a good place to be, a good place to hide. And he may or may not drop a bag of feed corn down and get the deer used to coming to that area and being nice and safe. The deer's not smart enough to wonder, how did a bag of feed corn get here? And sometimes we're not smart enough to ask,
Right, come on.
huh, why is he showing that much interest in me? Why am I suddenly being considered for this great promotion? Yeah, see, it's good for us not to turn down all opportunities, but just stop and think first. Could this be a stumbling block?
Yeah.
How do we check? How do we know? Well, does it take me away from the things, having in mind the things of God? Does it center me fully on just having in mind the things of men? If it does, guess what? It's a stumbling block.
All right.
You know, we were going to show a video clip, but we won't do that. Instead, we'll just have a picture of Chad's favorite football team. The Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a photo taken from a game in 2005. What Steelers fans know as the Ben Roethlisberger tackle. Ben Roethlisberger is a quarterback. He doesn't tackle people for a living. He throws footballs.
But he is big.
And so the Steelers in 2005, they were making a very unexpected run at going to the Super Bowl. They found themselves in the AFC Championship game. Someone else had knocked off the Patriots for them, so they didn't have to. And now they were right there. They were 1 minute away from advancing to the Super Bowl. They were already ahead by 3 points, and they were on the 1 yard line getting ready to score another touchdown that would have locked the game away. And so they did what any sensible guy would do, or any sensible coach would do. They handed the ball to their Hall of Fame running back, Jerome Bettis. Unstoppable almost. Big guy. Just needs to get 1 yard. Jerome Bettis fumbled the ball.
Uh-oh.
It pops up in the air, hits the ground once, and then as you can see here, number 25 ends up with it in his hands, and there's nothing in front of him except for green space and the end zone. And if he should reach the end zone, the Colts will take the lead just before time expires, and they will advance to the Super Bowl. Only one thing could stop him. Ben Roethlisberger's hand on his toes. He tackled him by the tippy toe. Unfortunately for the Colts, Nick Harper falls to the ground. One of the big guys behind falls on top of him. It's a tackle. And the Colts never make it to the end zone and never reach the Super Bowl. Ben Roethlisberger was a stumbling block. Stumbling blocks can be tricky. Stumbling blocks can keep you from reaching your goal. Whether that's in relationships, whether that's in your education, whether that's at your place of work, whether that's in your spiritual life. Stumbling blocks, seemingly harmless things, can create just enough of a distraction to take you away from the things that matter the most. I kid you not, my friends. If we're not diligently mindful, it is easy to trip. You could pull up 100 YouTube videos today before you go to bed of unsuspecting people losing their balance and hitting the ground.
Ouch.
Right? And we laugh. And it's funny because we've done it too, so we know what that's like.
Yeah.
And these people hit the ground hard without ever realizing what happened. But in almost every single one of those videos, it wasn't a mistake that they were making. It's usually not even so much an accident as much as it is careless. They head down a flight of stairs, outdoors, in the winter, which anybody who's lived up here long enough knows is a bad idea. Always check the quality of the stairs.
Always check. Always.
Grab that handle. Grab that railing. Don't think you can just fly on down those 3 steps in front of your house, because that's how you end up on your back, sliding down your sidewalk.
Oh, right.
Carelessness. Didn't shovel, didn't put down salt, didn't watch where they were going. I've seen videos of people, they're on their cell phone, they're walking right into a fountain.
Yeah.
Just right into the fountain, literally. The trip over the edge of it ended up in the fountain.
Oh no.
My goodness.
Is that an accident? You could call it an accident, but what is it really? It's distraction, it's carelessness. We can do the same thing, spiritually speaking.
Come on.
So what do you have in mind? What do you have in mind most of the time? No one's honestly going to have the things of God in mind all of the time. That is the goal. You get more proficient at it as you go. Nolan's getting baptized today. He's already had in mind the things of God for his whole life, but he's getting to the point now where he's got in mind the things of God more often than the things of men. He's thinking about it so much that he's considered, this is the church I grew up in, and I've graduated high school now, and I'm on to college and doing my job on the side, and is there more to life than just getting by and just making some money? Yeah. He set himself more and more on the things of God, and it's led him to this place or this decision that he's making today. It's encouraging to see. But many never reach that point. They just remain distracted. I'm not going to be delicate here. I believe that this church fellowship is faced with a decision of eternal significance. To either have in mind the things of men or to have in mind the things of God. You are wonderful people. Warm, hospitable, and kind. I've enjoyed the hospitality of most of the folks here. The kindness and the help and the support and the encouragement of most everyone in this room. And you provide that to one another. You have solid morals. You're good people. You have firm foundations. You've got all that going for you. And you get easily distracted. And you pursue opportunities that draw the best of you into things of men rather than the things of God at times. And if you need any proof, if you're sitting there feeling a little defensive, I can't do anything about that. But I can offer you some evidence.
Come on.
How often do you find yourself well versed in what's going on a television series or in sports or politics, but lacking in your personal Bible study? How often do you find yourself making room in your life for games and social media, but have little or nothing happening in your personal ministry of making disciples? And you're just okay with it somehow. Don't get it twisted. Don't get defensive. I told you, we all get off task about 47% of the time. This is just our lives, guys.
Right.
We all get there. I get there. We get distracted. So what do you do when you get distracted? Well, you have to make a choice at some point to come on back.
Absolutely.
And to get on track. And I did not intend to run. The great paradox here, as we wrap things up in Matthew chapter 16, is that Jesus asks us to lose something in order to gain something. So, warming things back up, Peter gets distracted. He tries to protect Jesus because he's got in mind the things of men rather than the things of God. And Jesus says, don't do that. Don't be a stumbling block. And then Jesus offers an alternative in the following verses. We pick it up here in verse 24. Right after he calls Peter a stumbling block and an adversary, he says to all of his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. See, that's the paradox. And then Jesus says, what good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world and yet forfeits his soul? See, I told you getting distracted can be fatal.
Right.
Or what? Here's the great question. Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? Verse 27, for the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with the angels. And then he will reward each person according to what he has done. Not what they intended to do, but never got around to because they got too distracted. We see it in business. We see it in sports. We witness it with family. It's not foreign to us. People are willing to sacrifice themselves in order to make something greater. If they see something as valuable, they're willing to make some sacrifices and give some things away in order to get the thing of greater value. Families do it all the time. We're not foreign to it. We just got to focus it on the things of God versus the things of men. When we value one thing more, we will sacrifice something less.
Yeah.
But when we won't make that sacrifice, it tells us something. It's very revealing. It tells us that the thing we won't sacrifice is actually more important. And sometimes that's the right choice. I'm not going to sacrifice, for example, an opportunity to spend the holidays with my family, get all my kids together under one roof. It's harder to do now that they're all grown up and living in 3 different cities.
Yeah.
Okay? So I'm not going to sacrifice that opportunity for just about anything. Even if someone called up and said, hey, I got tickets to, front row 50-yard line seats to the Thanksgiving Day football game this Thursday. But you got to go to Detroit or you got to go to Chicago. I'm like, nah, I'll pass.
Right. Absolutely.
That's not hard. We do it all the time. But if I suddenly said, oh yeah, I'm taking that game ticket, what would it say about how I valued my time with my family? I mean, what would it say? What would the bottom line be there? I can dress it however I wanted to dress it. It's the 50-yard line. It's the front row. I get to watch the Bears lose in person. It's one of my favorite things. I could put all sorts of spin on it.
Right.
But the bottom line would be, my family wasn't as important as me seeking my own joy, my own pleasure, my own priority. I'm more important.
Uh-oh.
That's what it would say.
Right.
We could do that same thing with God. Jesus calls followers to focus and to decide, hey, guys, this life or next life? I'm paraphrasing, but isn't that what he says?
Yeah.
What good is it to gain the whole world and lose or forfeit your soul? And even if you did gain the whole world, I mean, which part of it would you then be able to trade in exchange for your soul? What are you going to be able to give? Let's say you got your master's and your doctorate, and you became the CEO of some mega corporation and just invented something the world's never seen before and became twice as rich as the richest person that you got in mind. All right, what are you going to do for your soul? Write a big check?
Yeah.
You're going to give God shares in your company? Let's say you train and train and train, you become Mr. Universe or Miss America. All right. Cool, nothing wrong with that. But if it costs you having in mind the things of God versus the things of men, what are you going to do? Take your ribbon or your trophy and say, hey, God, I got a Mr. Universe trophy. God's like, buddy, I made the universe. Okay? I don't need your trophy. And God's rooting for us here. He's not setting things up at such a high level just to try to keep people out. He knows something. In asking us to give our lives, Jesus says that's where we gain them. You know that to be true from your own personal experience, how satisfied you feel when you expend yourself in the service of others. You know you feel like a better person when you do that.
Sure.
It's true.
How did that get in there? Because that's the way it's supposed to be. Jesus expects us to back up our choice with our actions, but our actions almost always follow what's in our mind. And that's why having in mind the things of God versus the things of men is so important. What can a man give in exchange for his soul is perhaps the most important question Jesus ever asks. If the soul is a real thing, is there anything more valuable? And the thing is, we're each going to participate in a trade. Several times over. Every day. You know what the trade is? The trade is either we're going to try to gain the world, or we're going to lose ourselves.
True.
That's the trade. Whichever way you go with it. You're trading the soul for the now, or the now for the soul. But we're all going to make the trade.
Right.
So I just want to encourage you to trade wisely. What we've done, not what we've intended to do, verse 27 tells us, will be the evidence of the choice we've made. See, there will be evidence to the choice we make. We can all say, oh, yeah, hey, Jesus is Lord.
Right.
Hallelujah. Christian radio. Turn it on. Right? Have a Bible. Preferably open somewhere in the house. But it's not those little symbols that dictate what we actually do. I'm not against Christian radio, by the way. Or open Bibles. But the evidence of the choices that we've made to focus on the things of God rather than the things of men are going to have a lot to do with our actions.
Right.
I love you. Every single one of you. So I plead with you to take this seriously, okay? This week I challenge you to study 3 scriptures. Can you do it? If you have in mind the things of God, you should know the answer. Can you do it? Can you study 3 scriptures? If you need a notebook, there's some on the table back there, okay? But jot these down. And whether or not you actually study these scriptures is going to say a lot about where your mind is. Okay? 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27. Study it. And consider how you're training. 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27. Colossians 3, verses 1 through 14. Study it. And examine yourselves. Where is your mind? Colossians 3, 1 through 14. And then last one. Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 12. Study it and reflect on where your eyes are fixed. Hebrews 12, 1 through 12. This, my friends, is the difference between finishing and tripping, winning and losing, hearing well done, good and faithful servant, and I never knew you. Depart from me. In this pursuit of having in mind the things of God, may God bless us all. Amen.
Amen.